Sean O'Malley cleaned up Fall River, Palm Beach, Boston, Dublin. He's now known in Italy and in the Vatican as a person who knows how to pour oil on the waters, listen, formulate a response, and make an effective plan. And I think that's why people have begun to think of him as someone who might be able to deal not just with the sexual abuse crises, which keep erupting all over the church, but specifically with the scandals and the corruption in the Vatican that have an administrative, financial, and bureaucratic dimension. We know that a lot of things are wrong in the way the Vatican has been governed. There are people being blackmailed. And so the next pope is going to have to be a very vigorous cleanup operator in the Vatican itself. Cardinal O'Malley grew up as part of an Irish Catholic family in the Midwest, in Cleveland. As a young man of his generation, he was strongly attracted to the priesthood. It was a time when a lot of young Catholics were still interested in the priesthood and religious orders. And he entered the Franciscans, but he entered a branch of the Franciscans which is rather strict about the vows of poverty. Technically, they're supposed to wear sandals, and they're supposed to let their beards grow as signs of poverty and simplicity. And that has really shaped Sean O'Malley's personality, his values, and his approach to life.
I went down to Washington a few years ago and did a series of columns. It's still to this day remembered very fondly among the maids, the domestics, the servants who work for these very well-off people in the diplomatic services, that on the day of the diplomatic mass, when all these diplomats and their families and everybody shows up in their finery, Cardinal O'Malley got up and during his homily more or less read out the people in the audience and said, you know, I've heard stories that that your workers are being mistreated, and you're not being a Christian when you do that. And this was outrageous to say this to a bunch of diplomats, and some people, I was told, got up and left. They were so angry, the diplomats being lectured to. But obviously Cardinal O'Malley, you know, became a hero that day in the eyes of the average maid from Guatemala who works for short wages.
How were you?
At the relatively young age of 40, he became the bishop in the Virgin Islands. Then he's brought back to the United States and becomes Bishop of Fall River in Massachusetts. Now that made sense because Fall River has a large Portuguese-speaking population, Azorians and Cape Verdeans. He speaks Portuguese fluently. He's fluent in Spanish. But while he's bishop there for about 10 years, scandals open up that no one was prepared for. Some of the earlier sex abuse scandals of clergy abusing children erupted in Fall River. Everyone was surprised, but Sean O'Malley did a wonderful job of dealing with it openly and honestly, removing those clergy, reaching out to victims. And so 10 years later, when another similar scandal erupted in Palm Beach, Florida, where the bishop had been hiding child abusers, he was sent to Palm Beach to clean up Palm Beach. It was his second cleanup assignment in the church. As O'Malley said, he was like a lot of Irishmen. He spent one winter in Florida because after 6 months in Florida, or 8 months, he was sent to Boston, his third cleanup job.
I think the first few years he was here, he was not so much a pastor as he was a CEO. He was brought into Boston precisely because he had done such a good job in Palm Beach and Fall River. Although, you know, I talked to some of the victims in Fall River as recently as today, and they don't like anybody suggesting that he did a good job. They said he was dragged to that settlement down in Fall River and that the district attorney had to threaten him before he actually came clean on some of this stuff. So, you know, the victims' rights, or the victims' advocate community, you wouldn't get quite as a favorable view as O'Malley as you might think.
Many people feel that he was slow to reveal the names of priests, that he didn't reveal all the names. A lot of parishioners resent the way that he proceeded to close parishes and reorganize clergy distribution. So he's not without his critics, but frankly, at this point in the Catholic Church, you can't do anything without having some critics.
I think a lot of what we're seeing is, if you go to Pittsburgh, I'm sure they're talking that their guy is in the running. I think a lot of this is sort of hometown boosterism. I do think O'Malley is, if there's going to be an American cardinal to become pope, I think he's clearly on the short list. I'm not so convinced that's true. I still think that the Vatican eyes America skeptically, that we're not worth the trouble.
So the idea of a pope who could be very connected to the United States and subject to pressure from the American government would make most cardinals step way, way back from an American pope. Frankly, the pope is about a lot more things than cleaning up messes. And everyone hopes that we can get beyond the current crises so that the pope can become what the Pope is best at, which is being a kind of international ambassador of the joy and love of Christ.